And it's a super big honor for me to introduce or to welcome, let's say, Yehuda. I'm pretty sure that everybody sitting in the audience has read at least one thing about Yehuda, be it a research article, be it one of his influential books, be it something on Twitter where he's quite active very recently. And today, Yehuda is going to talk about, oh my goodness, people are actually implementing my papers. We're looking very forward to your talk and are very grateful that you made the way over here to Aarhus, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you for having me here, and it's really great to start getting back to science. Although I'm not doing science here, but it's a step forward because there are no marketing slides or slides about revenue. So I'm already it's on the way back. So I think that I have to start by saying how we should read the title, because you could read it in a number of different ways. So the idea is you should be thinking of someone pulling their hair out, like, on the one hand, excited, people implement, but oh my God, people are actually implementing my papers, and what does that actually mean? And the thesis that I want to say is that with great success comes great responsibility. And I think it's really, really true in terms of this room. This room is great success. So I think there's people still need to get up, but about 150 people at the TPMPC, that's an incredible sign of a successful field. It used to be a very small handful of people who did MPC. It was a good thing to do when I was a grad student because almost nobody else could go through the pain of understanding the definition. So if you already did that, then you could start working and had a lead on everybody else. Today, it's a really big and thriving field in theory and in practice, and actually beyond practice in terms of actual commercialization. So not just practical or efficiency research or practical research. And with that success and I'll emphasize this as we go through, and with that real meaningful success comes great responsibility from us as a scientific community. And I'll exaggerate. I'm going to start by exaggerating, but please take it as a really massive exaggeration, because we shouldn't think, or I don't think myself nearly as important as this example is going to say. But if you're doing theoretical biology research, that might be different to if you're doing research on medicine. And if you're publishing a paper that talks about some treatment and there's a mistake in that paper, arguably this is going to be much, much more devastating or problematic than if you're just doing theoretical research. And I think that's what stands behind what I'm going to talk about today, but it's not about mistakes. Mistakes is one small part of it. It's about an awareness that we have this responsibility as a scientific community. So I want to start by saying something a little bit controversial. And I want to say that, at least in my opinion, there's a very different role between academia and industry in research. And the role of academia, at least in my mind, is to advance scientific knowledge. So sometimes, yes, we can solve problems for industry now, but that's actually not our role. Our role is to push the science further. And when industry wants to solve a problem now, then they can pay people to go ahead and do that. They'll probably do it faster. They have a different mindset. And in that sense, everything's okay. And actually, it's a controversial statement. There are many, many people who say that's not true at all. And academia should be looking at how they can have impact today. I think impact today is for industry. Our role here is to make sure that in 10, 20 years' time, when there's a need, when there are problems that don't have other solutions for, we've already prepared the science to be able to do that. So on the one hand, and because of that, we're actually not incentivized as academics to write papers that are for immediate consumption. Let's put it that way. So let's say, why don't we, for example, put in full specifications of exactly how to implement something that we've written in our paper? There are actually very good reasons why we wouldn't even want to do that. Number one, it would make our papers extremely hard to read. And for any of us here who still read papers will understand that they're really hard to read. So making them even harder to read is not exactly a great thing to do. It's not necessary for the science. Again, if our role is to advance science, then why should I be spending a lot of time and effort on something which actually isn't advancing science, and especially because it takes up a lot of time? And finally, I would argue that you can't even do it even if you want to, because the actual specification will depend a lot on how this is being deployed. And that's not something that we deal with when we write a paper. Do the parties have point-to-point connections? Are they working via some coordinator machine? Do they have state? Do they have local databases where they have as much state as, I don't know, all the keys that are being used, or do they only have a small amount of state? Are they on, what type of communication? There's so many different parameters when you actually come to specify and implement something that you just can't put them into a paper. So at no point at any time should anybody think that I'm arguing that it's academia's role to put everything on a silver platter for industry to come and take. However, we can be doing a much better job, because when people are actually interested in our field, and that's maybe for a lot of people here, that's like a given. Of course, everyone's interested in MPC. For many years, nobody cared about MPC. We had a couple of pretty bad examples of what people might want to do with it. Sugar beets was the only example for many years. A very good example, but the only example for many years. And my argument is that our approach to how we do our science should change now that people are actually interested in our field. Firstly, we should know that non-experts are going to implement. It's a disaster. In fact, it's a disaster if non-experts try to just encrypt something. Ask a non-expert to take a library and encrypt using symmetric encryption. That's all. You've got a key now. They'll probably mess it up, let alone we start thinking about advanced things like MPC. Experts implement, that should be okay, but what's an expert? I would argue I'm probably an expert in MPC, but am I an expert in zero knowledge? I've written a few papers on it. I'm sure many people think I'm an expert in zero knowledge. Because I don't know anything about ZK snarks, for example. Okay, so am I an expert in that area? Can I take a ZK snark paper and work with software engineers to make sure that it's properly implemented? I probably could if I spent a couple of months studying it, but if I don't do that, can I just read the paper and help someone implement it correctly? To be honest, I'm really not sure that I can. There's also a lot of respect for published and reviewed results, but we have less respect, I think, and rightly so. We know that a conference publication is not reviewed for correctness. A conference publication is reviewed for interest, and there's a sanity check. Journals used to have, maybe it's a good opportunity to rant about journals today. Journals used to have the role of validating correctness, but now if you've published a full proof in the conference, and you can because there are many more pages, you can't even publish it in a journal anymore. Journal of Crypto won't even accept it anymore because you don't have anything novel beyond what was in the conference. But the conference paper didn't actually review it for correctness. So that respect that the world has, oh, it was at Crypto, oh, it was at CCS, actually doesn't say very much at all about correctness. It's just interesting and novel, but not necessarily correct. So I've counted 5 challenges that I would say, one that I think are related here. One is how we relate to small but insignificant errors. 2, the protocols that we write are underspecified and omit obvious checks. Papers include incorrect protocol descriptions from other papers. Papers that have errors are not always corrected. And we often push to over-optimize, or what I would call aggressive protocol design rather than conservative, without necessarily making the trade-offs explicit. Now, important caveats. This doesn't always happen in many papers. Fine. And there's no blame here. And I'm going to be giving some examples of some papers from people in this room. And I hope you forgive me, but I'm going to lead by example and show many examples from my own papers. Okay, so it's about community awareness. It's not about blame at all, because I think the first slide I was trying to say about our role as academics and as in doing science doesn't mean we don't make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, but it's really not about blame. It's about awareness. Okay, so let's start. How do we relate to small but insignificant errors? So I published a result. The result is correct. So I have a protocol, has 4 rounds, 37 exponentiations, relies on DDH, if anybody does that anymore. And the result is correct as a theorem, but there's something wrong in the protocol specifically, where I wrote down the protocols. Actually, it can be broken, but I can fix it quite easily, and it would still have 4 rounds, 37 exponentiations, and rely on DDH. So scientifically, I've made the statement, but the protocol is actually wrong. And do we really care about such things? And I think theoreticians don't care so much, because if the theorem is right and there are a couple of small inaccuracies in the proof, Okay, not a big deal. But if I've written a protocol that someone may now actually go, again, oh my God, people are actually implementing my papers. Someone's going to go actually implement this. It's fine that, yes, you can, it's an existence statement. You can write a protocol for this problem that has 4 round 30 exponentiations and so on and so forth. But the protocol that's written in this paper is not that protocol. This one is completely broken, actually. And this can actually be a disaster. It's insignificant scientifically, but it's massively significant to someone who wants to implement and use this. And I'll try to be sort of annoying, and I'll give this example, but it's actually something that I think about, and I've thought about for years because I was doing this. So do we really do our best? We all make mistakes. And you'll see in the talk, I have many, many mistakes that I can attest to of mine. And it's fine to make mistakes because we're human. If you try, I'll be less forgiving if you didn't try. But if you try and you make a mistake, it's fine. But let's say I told you, great, your paper is accepted to crypto. If a bug is discovered, you have to put $100,000 in escrow down now. And if a bug is discovered in the next 2 years, you don't get it back. Okay, how careful will you be now in writing your final version, your camera-ready version? You'll be extremely careful, right? You will not take this lightly at all. Now, there are companies with not $100,000, but millions and billions of dollars writing, and there's something wrong with the writing on the results in the papers that we publish. And do we actually take that into account? So I can say that when I started in Unbound, yeah, it was like much more nerve-wracking to write down a protocol that's actually going to go into production and be used in a large bank, large organization, than it is to submit it to the camera-ready version. Because I always had the mindset, okay, there's a bug, so okay, it's not the end of the world. The result is correct, and make a small fix, and everything's fine. But that's not the case when you're going into production. And so the question is, do we really take the care that we need to as a community? And I would argue we don't, and we need to. And if you think, okay, but nobody's actually using this, you'll be surprised what people are actually using. There are many, many more results that people are using than you think. And sometimes people are implementing results that were published now, not a year or 2 years or 5 years ago. Now, at this conference, there's a paper that was, oh, wow, that solves my problem. And I actually go and I implement it. Okay, that's actually happening. You never know. You have no idea what you write may actually end up being implemented, and you should take the care that you need to thinking about what's writing on that. And this is, of course, related to the pace of research, and we're running so fast that it doesn't really pay us to be 100% accurate. And some people will say maybe this is a debatable topic, and I'll give you an example. When I was in grad school, I had a discussion or an argument with a friend of mine who was also a PhD student at the time, and said that he doesn't think it makes sense to spend a lot of time rewriting something to make sure the writing is really is really good in the paper. Because with that amount of time, you could write additional papers and it's better for your CV. I strongly disagree with that. I think it's a horrible, horrible thing to say. I think anybody who has to read papers, there are many more people reading papers than writing. Like, your paper should be read by many more than one person. So it's worthwhile spending 10 times the amount of time so that everybody else can read it in a tenth of their time. Overall, for a community, this is a much better trade-off. But it's also true about errors and correctness when we're running so fast. And again, maybe about writing, we can debate it, but I don't think we can really debate accuracy. If we consider ourselves scientists, then we need to be accurate about our results. And again, if you're theoretical, maybe you can argue about that, but I would argue for scientists, you should not be willing to tolerate any errors at all. And if it's being used, there's no doubt whatsoever in my mind that you can't tolerate any errors. Again, we all make mistakes, and mistake is fine. It's, did you do your best? Did you do your best? You know, it's a funny thing to say because we tell it to our kids, and it's not really true in the real world, so to speak, right? You have a job and your best is really crappy, well, you're fired. But everybody in the scientific world has proven that they're not crappy and that they have the skill and the ability. And then the question is, are you doing your best? And if you're doing your best, that's fine. No one can ask you for any more than that. And that's it. One of the nice things about the scientific community, unlike other places. All right. The next challenge is protocol specifications or protocol descriptions are underspecified. They're not specifications, they're descriptions, and they omit obvious checks. So here's a nice example from a paper by some guy. And this paper has actually been used quite a lot, a two-party ECDSA signing. And you don't want to look into the details here, but it basically says there that, one party generates Q1, sends to the other it's in Q2, you commit, open, blah, 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 blah. But it doesn't say anyway you should check that Q1 and Q2 are on the curve. And if it's a curve with cofactor greater than 1, that it's an element in the correct subgroup. We should all, I hope we all know that you have to do that. But it's not written anywhere because why bother? It's obvious. But anybody implementing it has no idea that they actually need to do that. And if you don't do it, actually opens up to a real attack. And for example, it's like Diffie-Hellman key exchange, right? So if I generate Q1 that has order 4, because I'm on a curve that has cofactor 4, then the resulting key that will come out, no matter if the other side, whatever they multiply it by, will actually have order 4. So there'll be 4 possibilities. So this will be a completely broken protocol. I know what the key is. Well, up to 4 possibilities. So it's obvious, but it's not written here. Again, an obvious check that we don't bother writing, and it doesn't cost us anything to write it. Well, a little bit, but not enough to be significant. Here's another example of a paper which talks about using pair. So you generate a key, send it to the other party, and deep in the paper somewhere, there's a remark that says, you should know the modulus needs to be greater than Q to the 7 or Q to the 8, whatever, the modulus needs to be large enough. But that remark, that check is not written in the protocol specification. When people come to implement a paper, they don't read the entire paper. And they can't. We have to actually, by the way, you're laughing at me, but we actually have a new policy that we will not use any paper we haven't read fully and fully understood because of the problem I'm talking about now. But other people don't. They have respect for published results. And why do I need to read the remark at the bottom of page 9 if the protocol on page 6 tells me everything I need to do? Problem is it just didn't say that. And there was actually a paper that shows how to completely break this. And it says here that with one signature, you can extract the secret key because of this bug. And if you think, well, does it matter? So this bug is this paper was actually deployed by Binance, I think by ING. This was actually a deployed result that could be completely broken with one signature. Under specification.
They got in bounty to show that this matters, right?
Sorry?
Then they get $500,000 in bounty for this.
From Binance? Maybe, I don't know. Yeah. So you're saying it's worthwhile doing the
it's worthwhile.
It's worthwhile putting missing it, leaving down your paper, and then yeah. I've been in business for a few years. I understand, but we'll write up a business plan afterwards. Here's another example of under specification. And if Ariel is feeling bad that I'm pointing at his paper, it's my paper as well. So one could argue that it's even more my responsibility. But so zero knowledge proofs, the beauty of Sigma protocols, thank you, Ivan, for doing this for us, is that they're so easy to prove as a Sigma protocol. To go for Sigma protocol zero knowledge is a pain, but you don't actually have to do that anymore, right? You just prove the Sigma protocol and you're done. And what do? We describe the Sigma protocol and say, great, use Fiat-Shamir. The problem is people don't know how to use Fiat-Shamir. So, here this is what I write. I say, these can be transferred using standard techniques. Great. What are standard techniques? Do people actually know what to do? There are 2 main problems with Sigma protocols, not just one. Everyone knows one, right? What's the one that everybody knows? People are getting really worried now. What is he looking for? Oh my God. Yes, the statement, whoever said it, the statement has to go inside the hash. Okay, if you don't include the hash in the statement in the hash, sorry, then this is broken. Okay. There's another one, by the way, that is much less well known because we don't typically think about it in Sigma protocols, but sometimes we have zero knowledge protocols that use cut and choose. And then I can send 40 copies, get a random query, and the soundness is 2 to the minus 40. That's fine. Maybe I want 2 to the minus 60. What happens if you use Fiat-Shamir on that without increasing the size? You're dead. It's completely broken. In 2 to the 40 time, I can completely break it. So it needs to be much, much larger. People don't know that. I use a statistical security parameter, for example, 40. And then people say, okay, a Fiat-Shamir. No, completely broken. Why don't we write it down? Ariel, any answer? We'll speak about it afterwards. Doesn't matter. Well, here's a blog, recent one. Oh, I think HMAC is the best random oracle. If you're asking me HMAC, just for random, SHA-256. Yeah. But SHA-256 is based on a block cipher, so I'm not sure it makes a difference. We can discuss that later. It's too technical for me at this stage of my life. Fiat-Shamir, this is a well-known bug, and here is in a blog recently that shows a whole series of implementations of bulletproofs which are all wrong because Fiat-Shamir was done wrong. Okay, so it doesn't matter in practice. Yes, this is being used in practice and it's being used wrongly, and these things are broken. So yes, it actually matters. And again, all of the examples I'm giving today, these are things, almost all of them, that actually have caused real problems. Session IDs, these are loved, Mike especially loves session IDs. We use them in UC zero knowledge, UC commitments to prevent them from being copied. If I give you a non-interactive zero knowledge proof that I know the discrete log of this point, well, you can give that to someone else. So what prevents you from giving that to someone else and copying it across? Or if I commit to something and the proof assumes that I know what's inside the commitment, you can take that and give it to someone else. What stops you from doing that? The answer is session identifiers. But where do they come from? We just say, oh, using a unique session ID. But where do they actually come from? How do you generate them? We don't talk about that. That's not interesting. They come from the environment. They come from the environment. Thank you. Thank you. That's why we call environmental sciences. Absolutely. But here's a real question. So here, a unique session identifier. Wonderful. Where? Who knows? So here's an example, a real issue. Frost is a protocol that people are using a lot. I'll talk about later. But it talks about here somewhere some context string to prevent replay attacks. So it's good that they write why it's needed. But here's a real comment I saw, a real question that I saw, believe it or not. The context in Frost's distributed keygen is just a context string to prevent replay attacks, but not mention how to generate it. Right now, it's just a fixed string in the implementation. For security, should we generate randomly every time we run keygen? Real question. And it's not funny because the person doesn't really understand. They haven't studied UC security. They're not like everybody here that's, you know, could write down the proof of UC composability off by heart, right? It's not clear why does this prevent replay attacks? It's just a string. It's like that context. Does it really matter, or is this one of those funny things that academics do to make their proofs go through? I've seen comments like that as well. So it's not clear, and we never talk about this. We just ignore it. We slip it under the carpet. Now it's not a stupid thing at all, because Frost's claim to fame is that it's 2 rounds of communication only. Assuming you know the message and you have a unique session ID. But if you don't have a unique session ID, then how do you do this in 2 rounds? Now it becomes 4 rounds or 5 rounds, or do coin tossing? So is it really 2 rounds? Or are they not telling me something? Because if I have to generate it and they're claiming it's only 2 rounds, what am I supposed to do? These are really legitimate issues that are just completely ignored and cause massive, massive problems. I told you, great responsibility, great success, great responsibility. Here's a huge mess up. This is the most embarrassing thing I've ever done in my life. I'm really embarrassed to show you this, okay? Because you have to think this guy is, I thought he knew what he was talking about, but now obviously he doesn't. So here's a paper from 2000 for range proofs. Now, I don't know, people here have done range proofs, some of you have. If you haven't, run, okay? These are horrible, they're amazing. They're just incredibly difficult and subtle. And I completely didn't understand them when I was asked to implement one. Completely didn't understand them. You know, I was, okay, but there are good people who've written this and they know what they're talking about. So, okay. Now, if you look in this protocol here, so it says in the paper that n has to be a large composite number that Alice and Bob don't know, but they don't know the factorization. Okay, I sort of missed that detail because in the protocol, before I get to that, in the protocol below, you can see that it says you do g to the omega h to the eta mod n. That's a Pedersen commitment, right? Pedersen commitments use prime groups, for prime order groups, right? So obviously we're talking about a Pedersen commitment and n is a prime. That's what I thought, sorry. I know it's embarrassing, okay. You're shaking your head, how did you do that? But I did, and I completely messed up. Luckily it wasn't in production, it was only an open source library. What?
How can you be a prime success?
How can you?
Be a prime.
That's true, but there you'd be surprised about strange things that people do. Little n, for example, for me is a security parameter, right? And why would it be little n if it's a module? It should be big N because there are two numbers inside. So, you know, I have a good answer to that one. And it's probably true, by the way. Had they written a capital N, I probably wouldn't have made the mistake. It's as stupid and subtle as that. But I was under a lot of pressure. We had to get things done, and I didn't take the requisite care. Luckily, it didn't go into production, but it's really embarrassing. And I had the protocol set it inside at step number 1, right? Mod n, where n is a modulus that neither party knows the factorization of. That's all they needed to do. Why put it in the paper? Now, arguably, you could say, okay, but it's 1.5 pages. It's in the paragraph before the protocol, right? It's not on page 9 at the bottom. But okay, I messed up. Okay, so should we write everything? That would be horrible. And you know, as with many cases, often you have better questions and answers. But at least we should have the awareness of the challenge. I don't think that we should try to say, let's write everything down. Absolutely everything has to go in. It's just impossible. But we need to keep in mind that people who are not experts will be reading our papers. And those people do not understand the subtleties. Okay, so I consider myself an MPC expert, but I needed range proof. How hard can it be? Okay, and I messed up. And other people will do that with many, many different things that we don't specify. And not even all cryptographers, I'm not even sure. I would argue there are probably people in this room, probably a number of people in this room who are not familiar with small order attacks on elliptic curve groups. It's fine, it's okay, you can't know everything. Ran, can I tell them your story about when you went to IBM? Yeah? So when I went to IBM for my internship in my PhD, I didn't know what Byzantine agreement was. I'd never heard of it. But when Ran went, he'd never heard of Diffie-Hellman key agreements. So it's a specific assumption. Who needs it, right? So you can't know everything. And when you're in a certain field, you know, you don't know everything. You can't know everything. You shouldn't assume that everybody needs to know everything. And people, not even all of us know about smaller group attacks, let alone people out there who are implementing our stuff. We can't solve everything, but I would argue that if it's a small cost, like instead of saying, probably I could write down the Fiat-Shamir specification with the same number of words as writing this can be made non-interactive using Fiat-Shamir understanding techniques. Probably the same thing. So why not? Why not do that if that's what I actually need for people to do? Okay, incorrect protocol descriptions from other papers. This one is surprising because it actually comes from really good intentions, but I think it's misguided. So a paper called DKLS for two-party threshold ECDSA uses OT extension. And they write down the OT extension inside the paper to make the paper self-contained. They write down the KOS OT extension. Problem is, they write it down incorrectly. KOS uses a binary field multiplication, which they change to AND for one of the checks. Mistake. It happens. It's an innocent mistake. The protocol is broken. Well, at least you can show that funny things can go on and didn't bother building a full attack, but the protocol is broken. Certainly you cannot prove this, and it seems very likely that this consistency check can be broken, at least with reasonable probability in this case. But what should we do about it? I would argue that we have an obsession as a field to make our papers self-contained, which is very good. But it also comes at a price it would be great. I think there was some time that some people here were talking about having some repository of definitions, and your PDF could link to it or even pop up or something. That would be great for definitions and other things. But when it comes to papers that you're citing or other protocols, I would argue that it's a huge mistake to rewrite the protocol. Just cite the paper, and people can go and do the work of looking there. Because A, you may make mistakes copying it, because we are human, we will make mistakes. That's part of who we are. That's why we're not AI. And that was a joke, by the way, but you don't have to laugh if you don't want to. The second is, what happens if the original paper had a bug and it was found, and they did the work and corrected their paper, but this paper that had copied the protocol across was before the bug was found, and they may not even know about it, and it will never be corrected. So this will be an error that's going to be perpetuated forever. So my proposal on this one is very, very simple. It's an easy one. Don't do it. It's a nice idea to make everything self-contained. Don't do it. And by the way, there's a price, because I know at least of one organization who implemented this protocol. The reason they did it is because it was really, really nice that everything was in one place for them. Okay, but I still think it's a mistake and not to do that. Yeah, so yeah, we could do a lot better as a field of, for example, having, okay, this is the standard definition for a UC commitment, and you just hyperlink and it opens up or whatever. Ivan, you had a proposal to do this, didn't you, at some stage? Never happened. So yeah, but at least just cite the paper. Okay, so papers with errors are not always corrected. Here's a paper about fixed key block ciphers, and it was published in 2019. And one of the papers that it cites that was not done correctly is ZH17. And all I want to show you is that if you look on ePrint, you can see this paper has not been updated since 2017 when it was published. In other words, it was not corrected. There's a paper that came out that shows that this is incorrect, and it just wasn't corrected. And it happens multiple times. So here's drivers attack, and it can break. There's a protocol called MUSIC that it can break with 127 signatures only in less than 2 to the 45 steps. So really, really, really bad break. Okay, look at the original paper on archive, 2016 updated, whereas drivers attack was published in 2019. They had to know about this, not corrected. People will go and take this paper from archive, and they may implement, even though it's completely broken. What else? So this one's easy. Correct your papers immediately and clearly. There should be a comment in on the front page of your paper, probably also in ePrint where you can add comments. And is it embarrassing? Yes, but I argue it won't harm you. And I have a proof that it won't harm you because I'm here. And I want to show you something. Again, just look at this. These are all different papers of mine. And there are more. In fact, this is only the ones I could find very quickly. And I know for sure that there are more that have these comments on. I'll let you in a little secret. I'm sure that there are more that had errors. And we didn't bother putting it on the front page because maybe, I don't know what. I'm assuming. But there are 9 papers here of mine. Some of them are small errors. Some of them are major errors. This is something that as a community, we need to do much better. If we accept that's part of who we are, then it's okay to make mistakes. Then we need to correct them and fix them as quickly as we can. Okay, this is the hardest one of all. And this is the hardest one of all, but this is really, really important in my mind. And I argue that we push as a field to over-optimize. It's not always needed. And also when we do it, we don't make the trade-offs explicit in terms of what we're doing. So I'll try to explain. So it's sort of not great when I'm writing my abstract. Here is a new paper that is 30% slower than the previous best. Sort of doesn't go across well with the reviewers. And this means I actually always have to write more and more efficient papers, but there are other things that maybe I should be thinking about as well. So how do I relate to a paper that's slower but more conservative in its design. I'll tell you what I mean by that in a second. Versus another paper that's faster but maybe on the edge. And what do I even mean by on the edge? So one thing we can talk about, well, maybe we should, this is the theory and practice of MPC. So let's talk about the theory and the practice. As a theoretician, well, I'm really interested in reducing the assumptions. I'm also often interested, but not always, I'm often interested in having a simpler proof. If it's significantly simpler, I'm actually interested in that. I don't really care about if it's 30% faster, I couldn't care less. I even had someone ask me, do we really care about Chinese remaindering decryption for RSA? I mean, it's only a constant. It's only a quarter of the time. I said, are you nuts? Think about an organization that has to have 4 times the number of web servers to support their website. That's what it means. So if practitioners are extremely, extremely sensitive to 20, 30% improvements and obviously 4-time improvements. But they, on the other hand, they often care much less about the assumption. Not always, but very often they care much less about the assumption. But that also is unclear, right? The legacy world, it took like 5 years before people started using AES after it was standardized, because we didn't understand, we weren't confident enough in it yet. So there's a very big dissonance, but in a lot of the advanced cryptography that's being used, people are not looking really at what assumptions there are. And in many cases, I'll argue that we don't need the highest possible efficiency. So yes, I'm using MPC to do the handshake for TLS, that has to be really, really, really fast. If I'm doing code signing, which is an extremely important problem that we can actually help a lot with MPC, by the way, it's very well suited for MPC. Similar in many, many ways to the Bitcoin or cryptocurrency application. We don't need the highest efficiency. You're signing on, every now and then you're signing. And if you're signing on, thousands of transactions a day, 10,000 transactions a day, it's nothing. It's absolutely nothing. We don't really need the highest efficiency. So should we be taking the fastest protocol? What about a protocol that's not as fast, but is more obviously secure? We can be intuitively much more convinced more easily. The proof is much clearer. The assumptions are more well established. What are standard assumptions? I always have to tell the story of when I was in my PhD, I wrote a paper, and in the abstract, that's also something that's from the past, right? Writing the abstract, what your assumption is. So I wrote that the result is based on standard assumptions, and Oded Godreich took the big marker and crossed it out and said DDH is not a standard assumption, because it's a decisional assumption and not a computational assumption. And Rani's sitting here saying, of course, he's right, yeah. But today, of course, that's a very standard assumption, but people don't even talk about what their assumptions are that they're using. And it's sort of hidden somewhere very, very deep. And you can even find things like, we present a proof of such and such and such. The only thing that they missed is that it's a proof in the generic group model. That doesn't say that in the abstract even. Okay, so this question is a very, very tricky question. And I want to give you some examples. Here's a paper. I'm not giving the authors here, but you can look it up if you want to, that had a protocol with that they could only prove security if it had the zero-knowledge proofs inside. But they thought that the zero-knowledge proofs aren't really needed. For whatever reason, I can't really explain. And they did all, and they wrote all of, and they provided all of their implementation timings and results without the zero-knowledge proofs. And they wrote that we conjecture that a protocol remains secure if the zero-knowledge proofs are eliminated. To support it, we propose some ad hoc computational assumptions, which, if true, would guarantee the security of the protocol. Practitioners read this and say, respected cryptographers think that this is secure and it's fine. That's the way they read it. I'm not sure what the authors meant. I think they meant that as well, but I'm not sure, but it doesn't really matter. But it's certainly the way that it was read by practitioners. And with a small, I think with 8 signatures, it says here, yeah, with 8 signatures, you can break this scheme, because if you don't have those zero-knowledge proofs inside, and again, this impacted production libraries. It was in production. This is not a theoretical concern. This was in production, and so conjectures are fine for science, right? It's absolutely fine to say I have a new assumption, but it should not be used. I think we need to be very, very clear that this is not an assumption that we understand well enough to actually go out into production with. And in general, are we studying assumptions enough? And that's a whole other rant that I need another, don't have that much time. Okay, so around complexity also, people seem very fixated around reducing the number of rounds. For example, ECDSA and Schnorr have multiple rounds, more than 3 typically. But there's a lot of work to get 2-round protocols. Does it really, really matter in practice? So some people say, yeah, well, if I have one of the participants is a cold element in a bunker, I have to go back and forth. And sometimes you do, but most cases not like that. And the 2-round protocols have a very, very significant trade-off. So here's a paper, again, DKLS. In order to prove the 2-round protocol, they need to use a very, very strange ECDSA functionality, which is on the right-hand side here. And all you need to note is that as MPC researchers, we understand that the whole beauty of functionalities is they're simple. You look at them and you understand what they do and why it's secure. That's all I need to say about what's written on the right-hand side here. It does not fulfill that paradigm. And it's proven equivalent to ECDSA in the generic group model, which many people will tell you, even people who don't mind the generic group model, for ECDSA, it's a complete disaster because they actually do look at the content. So there's a trade-off here, but it's not talked about. It's very, very, very implicit. Frost, again, the protocol I mentioned, 2-round protocol for Schnorr. First round can be pre-processed before you know the message. Supposedly, the early versions were broken and didn't have any proof of security. There's a follow-up now, which I understand proves it, but with interactive assumptions. But standardization of this protocol happened even before the proofs, even before there were proofs. Even if there are proofs now, they haven't undergone any review. Why? If you're telling me it's a scientific work in progress, that's fine. But why are you standardizing something so early that's not ready? And the folklore simple 3-round protocol, really simple one, people don't even know about. So this is this aggressive, we have to be as efficient as possible. Someone has a 2-round protocol, we can't be 3 rounds or it'll get rejected. We have to do something which is novel scientifically. But people out there don't know about the simple things that can be implemented and are much, much safer. Another example with OT extension. Amazing tool, studied greatly. KOS captured the market, pushed everyone out. Much, much more efficient. And this is not at all a criticism of KOS. It's a question to the community. There are many follow-up work, so confidence also grew in KOS, and it's been used in production. But we saw yesterday that there's a problem there. Maybe the parameters need to be changed. Again, not a problem with KOS because we all make mistakes. But as a community, once KOS was there, you couldn't do anything else because what are you going to say? My protocol is 30% slower than KOS and has a more intuitive proof. I don't think anybody would accept a paper like that. So as a community, what do we do about this? I don't have any good answers. I'm bringing this example because it's such a difficult one. And OT extension, typically you do need, when you need really high efficiency. You don't use OT extension when efficiency isn't that important. So how do we relate to research which is more conservative, which is less aggressive, which is not running to always be as fast, but maybe has other values? Very, very, very hard question. Marcel, don't be angry with you. It's not about KOS, it's about the issue. So, we have this concern, fastest always wins. But I'm not sure that we should have this. I know that I myself have said very often, if I'm writing a theoretical paper, I will make the protocol less efficient in order to have a simple proof. If I'm writing a paper for actual, practical paper, I want a more complicated proof and a more efficient protocol. I don't think I agree with that statement anymore. Unless you really need it. Again, when you need it, you need it. But I don't think we should always be favoring the faster protocol with the more complicated proof over the mildly slower protocol with the simpler proof. I don't think it's true anymore. And using conservative assumptions, sort of like a lost art form, you're really old when you talk about assumptions. Again, you need something less standard, and because you don't have any choice, whatever that means. and the trade-offs are very explicit and people understand what the trade-offs are. People, grown-ups are grown-ups. They can make whatever choice they want, but we're often not explicit enough in that. We're not interested enough. Are we as interested as it? Do we care if it's DDH or OMDL, one more discrete log? I am, but probably many people are not. And especially new ad hoc assumptions. They might be, well vetted, but I wouldn't deploy them. It doesn't mean it's good. It's not good research. Again, our role as scientists is to push science forward. So coming up with new assumptions that enable us to get much faster efficiency is great, but it doesn't mean we should be running to deploy them, or they should be. It's ready for implementation, and we should be very clear about that in what we're writing. So to sum up, it's really about awareness. And I want to stress it's not just about the cryptocurrency space. Yes, a lot of MPC implementation is happening there, but not only. It's being used by many large financial organizations, credit card companies, banks, and others. The commercialization initiatives are growing fast. And we don't know actually who's implementing what and where, and who's doing the implementation. And for us, writing papers, or not so much me anymore, but hopefully I'll start again. We have a massive, massive responsibility to have awareness that people are going to be using this. So we should think about our reader, not just as if we ever think about our reader, which we should, but not just as a scientist, but now someone maybe who's not a scientist. And we can make our protocol descriptions more explicit or more abstract. I can write a three-party Schnorr protocol. I have a paper that I wrote now that the protocol itself takes a full page. When I want to prove security, I rewrite the protocol in like a very small paragraph using a UC commitment functionality and zero knowledge functionality. And it becomes really, really compact. But to unravel that is actually very challenging for people who want to implement. So can we take that into account more when we're writing our papers? And again, it's not about fault. People implementing who don't have the expertise are just as much as fault or maybe more, but I'm talking to you. So if I'm talking to them, I'll tell them off as well. Again, people implementing, don't implement unless you really understand. It's not realistic, but that's the reality. And engage with experts as a consultant. That's an advertisement, so all of you will have lots of money in the future. And great care needs to be taken, and I say that really with the utmost seriousness. So again, with great success comes great responsibility, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yehuda, for the inspiring talk for the entire community. So we have a lot of things to think about in the future. Are there any questions? We have time for 5 minutes questions. Yes, Paul.
Thank you for starting. One thing you didn't mention is, as there also be junior research, when you find a paper and you find bugs, what do you do?
Oh, this is a long rant. Okay, so I don't like bug research. And if I find a bug, I like to write an email to the person whose paper it is and say, here, I found a flaw, you should fix it. And it's very nice. They write a nice acknowledgement saying thank you to such and such for finding the flaw, and they fix their paper, and I think that's enough. The only difference is if there's real deep research that went into finding this bug, or the bug is not an obvious one, or the bug is one that actually fixing it requires real research, then yes, indeed, write a paper on that. But you find a bug, I personally am not a fan at all of the. We can fix it amongst ourselves, and that's absolutely fine. Again, but if you write them and they don't fix it or they don't respond to you, then yeah, kill them.
All right, so this next.
Thank you for a very nice talk. It's a really good talk and some very interesting points. Also from myself, like having moved from like theoretical into the more practical and also reviewing things. It's a huge mess. You don't know everything. You think you know the basic stuff, and you realize there's a whole bunch of tiny edge cases you overlook. I was just wondering so I would think the main approach for this is by companies to actually hire not just one but multiple independent people to verify both implementation and the underlying protocol, because someone is always going to overlook something. And
So I'll tell you the process that we do.
yeah.
We did this at Unbound, and we're doing it more rigorously at Coinbase. A theoretical paper is written. That's independently reviewed within the team and externally by the security team, and they will hire a consultant to independently review it. A specification is written based on the paper, and independently reviewed that the specification matches the theoretical paper. Because as much as you make your paper explicit, it's never going to be a protocol specification for software engineers. The code is then written, and independent code review takes place to verify the code actually matches what's in the spec. So yes, this is the sort of process that you need. You need independent review of the paper. You need an independent review of the entire cycle from the theoretical paper all the way through to the actual code itself. Shane?
Just a rule of thumb that I'm using personally, write as many details as you need so that when you go back to your paper in a month, you'll know what you're talking about.
The problem, Shai, is that we already don't have memory, but they all have, so they don't realize. I think in a month they're going to come back, and so think about 5 years for everybody else.
Yes.
Just one personal comment. I mean, I like this. I really like the talk. This is super important, and I think a lot of people overlook it. I would say for practitioners, the rule I have myself when working with some of the companies is you never implement a protocol that you didn't prove yourself. It's not enough to read the protocol. It's not enough to read the proof, because you will overlook stuff in the proof. Proofs are, magic things. You speak a proof check on the department here. At some point you have to sit down and then prove the paper again yourself. Then it all comes out.
Yeah, that you can see an MPC. Well, you can see you're an MPC researcher because you're in the ideal world. But
no, I'm not. The time it takes to implement something in the end, it's much larger than sitting down and making sure the thing is correct.
So I fully agree with you. I think that's even better than doing a full journal review yourself. I fully that's a great suggestion.
The end goal of that is at some point the industry have to reach a point where they sit down and write down specifications in COP or some other proof assistant and write down the proof formally and push a button and have a computer tell you.
I think it's I think it's an extremely important area of research, formal verification, and people doing that on MPC protocols as well. So that's a great direction for people to pursue. And
you don't test your way out.
Yeah, but again, I think that I think again the talk here was focused on the researchers, on the practitioners. Yes, there's a lot of things I have to say to them as well. So I agree with you.
What do you think about researchers providing prototype implementations along the papers? Is that helpful, or is it even more dangerous because it's not production code?
Well, it's certainly not production code. It can be good because to verify correctness, as long as it's clear that it's not production code, that can help. Again, if you're clear that it's not production code and people use it anyway, that's their problem. We don't have to babysit practitioners, right? Or people in industry who are trying to save themselves some time. So if it's a complicated protocol, I think it can be helpful. By the way, an interesting idea that some people also do is to implement the simulator. It doesn't tell you if it's indistinguishable, but you'll be surprised that sometimes the simulator doesn't even work. So it's an interesting idea. You can write a functionality in a simulator and run it with an adversary, or just even with the honest party to start with an adversary. There are a lot of things we can do, the sanity checks around what we do. Writing a prototype, certainly to help for checking correctness of the implementation is a good idea. Yeah.
Thank you for the interesting initial talk. A question on a standardization perspective. Could you comment on how you think the welcoming on or unwanted by the industry to have maybe a set of generic recommendations and guidelines?
So my problem with standardization is that all these people are still doing so much work all the time, right? I mean, garbled circuits even not the same as they were a few years ago, and you just turn around and everything is moving so fast. You're going to standardize something which is not going to be relevant. So I think some tools we can standardize. I don't think we can standardize full things. Certainly industry would be very welcome to that.
I meant less specifically on what you said about, like, instead of standardizing specific protocols, instead of that issuing generic guidelines and recommendations on things like presented like sanity checks.
So I think there are many things that are relevant to do. NIST has a whole series of documents which are not standards, which talk about. Some of them are really, really, really good. I learned about zero trust from one of them, for example. Right? It's a really good document. It talks about security, a certain security paradigm. I think that could also be very helpful. Yes, I think it's important that it be very clear in such a document that advanced modern cryptography should be implemented by experts only. This is not, for the weak at heart.
All right. If there are no more questions, let's thank Yehuda again.
Thank you all.